Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. The White House is meeting with various lawmakers trying to get support for the president's $4 trillion plans for infrastructure and families. This week, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are set to meet with the big four congressional leaders, Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, Chuck Schumer, and Mitch McConnell. They'll discuss the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. Monday, Mr. Biden pointed to April's disappointing jobs report as a reason why his proposal should be passed.
Because of the American Rescue Plan, forecasters are projecting we'll see the fastest economic growth in nearly 40 years in the months to come. We're moving in the right direction. So let's be clear. Our economic plan is working. I never said, and no serious analyst ever suggested, that climbing out of the deep, deep hole our economy was in would be simple, easy, immediate, or perfectly steady.
With Republican leaders opposed to the president's latest proposals, it appears he'll need every Democratic vote he can get. Satisfying the moderate and progressive wings of the party may not be easy. On Sunday, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders said Democrats should pass the president's infrastructure bill now. He told Axios on HBO, quote, "The American people want results. If Republicans want to come on board, seriously, great. If not, we're going to do it alone." Meanwhile, the GOP is grappling with a fight over leadership. Just 2 months after surviving a secret vote to oust her as party conference chair, Congresswoman Liz Cheney has lost support from Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. He is now publicly endorsing New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik to replace her. A party vote is expected this week. Nikole Killion, Tamara Keith, and Alayna Treene join me now. Nikole is CBS News congressional correspondent. Tamara is a White House correspondent for NPR and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. And Alayna is an Axios congressional reporter and co-author of Axios Sneak Peek newsletter. Welcome. It's good to have you all. Before we get into infrastructure, Tamara, new polling shows that President Biden is coming out of his first 100 days with a solid overall approval rating, yet immigration remains a huge challenge. What is being done to address that?
Well, certainly the administration is trying to deal with it. They had those reunifications of a handful of families last week, and the vice president is continuing conversations with leaders from Golden Triangle countries. But this is a weak point for President Biden. It is a perceived weakness, and it is an area where he's not doing as well, where when you dig into the polls, Republican opposition is universal, which definitely brings his numbers down, and where Democrats and independents aren't 100% convinced that it's going particularly well. So they are continuing to work through this, but it is the one red flashing light in otherwise really promising poll numbers that President Biden has in terms of approval overall, even related to the economy, certainly related to the coronavirus.
All right, let's talk infrastructure. Alayna, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell shot down the American Jobs Plan's $2.3 trillion price tag. Have Republicans indicated what they would be willing to pay for and how?
Well, Elaine, I think it's still to be seen. There's a lot of disagreement between the two parties on this. And I do think that both sides are hopeful that they'll be able to find some middle ground. But right now, it's unclear. And we saw some of this with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell saying he would be for the gas tax potentially and continuing that instead of raising taxes on some of the wealthy and those who make over $400,000. But I think it's key to see in their messaging that they're not actually talking about the tax part as much as they are talking about what they don't want out of the package. And that's largely because the plan to raise taxes on the wealthy and those who make $400,000 or more, or on wealthy corporations, is actually very popular. And so it's kind of a fine line, I think, that Republicans recognize that they have to tread there. There was some talk, I know, of even some Democrats on the Hill of potentially trying to finance the plan through deficit financing, but that's not really gained a lot of steam among leadership or those within the Biden administration. And so that's the main sticking point here, is how do you pay for this package? And so even though a lot of Republicans are saying, we would be for a bill that could potentially go up to $800 billion. That's something that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said he would be open to, a ceiling of somewhere of $600 to $800 billion. Even though we'd be for a bill on expanding the traditional infrastructure, which is roads, bridges, ports, airports, not knowing how to pay for it is going to be a huge sticking point. It's the real reason that bipartisan packages haven't passed on infrastructure in the past. And so it's a key week now, I think, to see how these negotiations go. The president's meeting with Senators Joe Manchin today, as well as Tom Carper, who's the lead. He's the chairman of the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee. Later this week, he'll be meeting with some key other members of that committee, including Senator Shelley Moore Capito, the top Republican on the committee. And he also has his Big Four meeting this week with the leaders of both the House and the Senate. And so a lot of talk on whether they can find common ground, but the big sticking point, how to pay for it, still not worked out.
Tamara, even with this outreach to Republicans, you have progressives who see attempts at bipartisanship on infrastructure as a waste of time. How is the White House engaging them, and what challenges do they pose for the administration?
Well, it's a math game, right? You need every single Democrat in the Senate on board if they end up having to go a route that is not bipartisan and that is Democrats on their own. And the challenge for progressives is that working with Biden, even if Biden is trying to get these bipartisan deals with Republicans, they are going to get a lot more than they would get otherwise. But at the same time, there are real concerns from progressive lawmakers that if Biden does strike a deal on sort of the hard infrastructure, so roads, bridges, those sorts of things, a $600 to $800 billion bipartisan deal, which is sort of the talk that's going around, if that is possible, then what happens to the rest of President Biden's $4 trillion proposal? Much of the rest of it focused on families. Then potentially that becomes something that they go it alone. They raise taxes to pay for it on the wealthy, and they do it Democrats only, as Senator Sanders talked about in the Axios interview. But the concern that some progressives have is that these non-hard, sort of soft infrastructure focused on families and education and childcare and getting women back into the workforce who have been affected by this pandemic, all of that then could fall to the back burner. And there is a push from progressives to make sure that doesn't happen. And you're hearing agitation that, it's time, these talks can only go so long. And that they want more. But that is the role of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, is to push the president and the White House and the moderates. And, it's the role of the Joe Manchins and the Kyrsten Sinemas and other senators to push back and say that they want to actually negotiate something and they want a stake in it too, and they don't want to be a rubber stamp.
Nikole, I wonder what you're hearing on all of this, because why not just take the go-it-alone approach, do budget reconciliation when it comes to infrastructure, since it does include some of those things that Tamara was just talking about. While Republicans may have a problem with the price tag and the definition of what constitutes infrastructure, elements of it do seem to satisfy those progressives that Tamara was talking about, who are pushing intently on getting these priorities done. Why not do budget reconciliation on infrastructure from the White House's perspective?
We saw what happened when Democrats passed the COVID relief bill earlier this year, and they went alone with that strategy, and it sparked a lot of pushback and outrage from Republicans who said, hey, I thought this was a president who was going to work across the aisle, citing the president's speech from the inauguration that he was going to be, this unifier in chief. And so Republicans do and have tried to hold the president to account from that level. And we know, too, that the president has always kind of been a negotiator. So really, from an optics standpoint, it certainly benefits the president and the White House to at least try and reach across the aisle and make that attempt, as opposed to just ignoring a complete party. So from that standpoint, I think that's why you're seeing this really aggressive outreach by the White House to sit down with a number of Republican senators later this week. And keep in mind, this isn't just a one-off or a one-time thing, that, the White House has been in touch with folks like Shelley Moore Capito for several weeks now, and that she's been speaking to the president regularly about this. So from that standpoint, I think, both sides want to put that good faith effort forth first, but the White House has certainly cautioned that if that doesn't work, then they reserve the right to try to pursue this unilaterally, which is what some, Democrats on the Hill have suggested. So again, we'll have to watch and see how the negotiations play out, but at least for now, everyone seems to be operating in good faith.
All right, switching gears to the leadership fight on the House side, Alayna, on Sunday, Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan criticized how his party is handling the leadership questions surrounding Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
Successful politics is about addition and multiplication, not subtraction and division. It just bothers me that you have to swear fealty to the dear leader, or you get kicked out of the party. It's sort of a circular firing squad where we're just attacking members of our own party instead of focusing on solving problems.
Some of that language may sound familiar, like former President Barack Obama's message to Democrats back in 2019. Let's listen to some of that.
One of the things I do worry about sometimes among progressives in the United States, maybe it's true here as well, is a certain kind of rigidity where we say, I'm sorry, this is how it's going to be, and then we start sometimes creating what's called a circular firing squad, where you start shooting at your allies because one of them is straying from purity on the issues.
So, Alayna, what does the boxing out of Liz Cheney say about the party's vision and efforts to expand their base?
Oh, well, Elaine, I think, the big question really following the November election was, what does the future of the Republican Party look like in a post-Trump world? And what we're seeing, at least in the House and among House Republicans, is they want to be the party of Trump. They are continuing to be loyal to him. And those who even don't agree potentially with his rhetoric or have criticized him in the past are choosing to not do that and to not criticize them and not to come to Congresswoman Cheney's defense, because they see it as political suicide in many ways. And it shows the power and the grip that the former president still has on the party. Now, of course, Liz Cheney sees it differently. I've spoken with her, I've spoken with her team in the past few weeks, and they say that really they see this not only as, the right thing to do for the party, but potentially, the right thing politically for her. And I think that also really does characterize or factor in here a lot of what she's calculating in what she's doing, because she really has had the opportunity to maybe walk back some of her remarks and criticisms of the former president, but she's choosing not to. Now, of course, the other Republican leaders, House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy, the number 2 Steve Scalise in the House, are choosing to stay loyal to the former president. They see him as being necessary to win back the House majority in 2022. That is their goal. They're looking at the short-term goal. Kevin McCarthy wants to be speaker, and they see that the former president as being required really to do that. And so I think, she will very much likely, if not guaranteed, to be replaced by Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, a very loyal Trump defender. And that really is where the direction of leadership in the House wants to go right now and where it will go.
Right. Speaking of the former president, Nikole, former President Trump is planning a series of events that would mark a return of sorts to the spotlight for him. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, well, one of the former president's senior aides tells us that he does intend to potentially get back out on the campaign rally circuit as early as later this spring or possibly early summer. And the Republican National Committee has already been polling supporters about potential locations for this first event. But I think what it shows when and if this does happen is really this outsized role that Republicans expect the former president to play. And that is something that his aides have made clear to us, from the beginning of this year, that he does intend to be very actively engaged in the midterm election cycle. We've already seen him throw his support behind a number of congressional candidates for 2022. So we can only expect this will be the first, potentially, when he gets out there, the first of many rallies to come once he takes that step.
All right, we'll be watching closely. Nikole Killion, Tamara Keith, and Alayna Treene, thank you all for your insight. Really appreciate it.